If you want to turn in your Bibles to 2 Samuel chapter 5, we'll start there. It is incredibly humbling to stand on this stage one time, but to have been allowed to stand and study and teach and think for 24 years. I do not possess the eloquence to say what that means to me. This event has changed my life. I'm indebted to the board. Some of the closest people I love in the world I met at this event and in rooms like this. Dale, you are too kind to me when you talk about me, and I appreciate you. I didn't hear that. I'm sorry, and I love you. So we're going to read a story, and this is a jumping off point. I love to do expository preaching. That's where you just take a simple text. You don't run all over. You just take a text and you expose what the writer was talking about. You do facts. Who's writing? Who's he writing to? What's going on there? What are they using to solve their problem? The facts lead to concepts, and the concepts turn into applications. Well, my second favorite kind of story to do is a narrative. That you just take a story, and stories work the same way. You take what happened, you make some anecdotal observations about it, and then you make some applications. This is one of those stories. A lot of the Old Testament narratives aren't written for a specific doctrinal purpose. They're just windows into the lives of men. They're windows into the lives of women. This is what people who loved God did, and sometimes we can draw observations from them. This is one of those stories, and you know, if you are a Star Trek person or a Star Wars person or a Harry Potter person, you know, there's the backstory and there's the lore, there's the canon, the things that happen. This is one of those things that establishes this thing about David that everybody knew about David. Not sure if it was true, but everybody knew about David. Dale always introduces me, usually makes reference to me hurting him. I've only put Dale to sleep one time. Only one time, and I really didn't do it right. I kept my hand on top of his head. If I put my hand behind his head, he'll go to sleep in 6 seconds. I kept my hand on top of that coif of hair he's got, but, you know, his eyes rolled a little bit. That's... You know, but Dale's like, Lonnie could kill me. I've never put anybody to sleep that didn't deserve to be put to sleep, okay? I'm not a violent person. I'm not a bad guy. But, you know, Dale tells this stuff like, you know, I'm lurking in the shadows, going to jump out at him at any minute. Well, that's one of those things. I made a comment one time about that one of the rookie mistakes a youth minister makes. There's 2 rookie mistakes youth ministers make. Rookie mistake number 1 is lock in. Straight. Hey, let's get a bunch of teenagers together. Let's keep them up all night. Let's feed them carbohydrates and not let them sleep. And give them a complete run of a large building. No, that's a rookie. The other thing that I said is second biggest mistake youth ministers make is bonfire devotionals. Now, I don't have any problem a bunch of Christians sitting around a bonfire and singing. I think it's beautiful, except the acoustics are bad and the smoke gets in your face. And it's dark, and you don't build a bonfire unless it's cold, so you're in the dark asking teenagers to snuggle. And that's just dumb. It's just not a good thing to do. Now, I had rather sit around a bonfire and sing than somebody say, hey, Lonnie, we're going to sing around the bonfire, and then you're going to preach. No. I can't read in the dark anymore. I stand, you know, the last time I spoke at a bonfire devotion, we used the bonfire as an object lesson. We took the flame itself and did facts, concepts, applications like I do with stuff on the ropes course. But you make that one statement in a youth minister's workshop, hey, bonfires are a dumb idea, and then you get this reputation of Lonnie hates bonfires. I like bonfires. I've got one of those giant Sterno cans in my yard that I build fires in. But Ben Hayes will have me going somewhere. He'll go, hey, Lonnie, we've got you speaking at a bonfire devo, and they just poke me all the time. It's something I said at a workshop that has taken legs and grown on its own. This is kind of what happens in this story. So David has been running from Saul. Saul has been killed at war, and David is now the king of Israel. In order to unite the warring factions of Israel, David has done some heroic stuff. But today, he's going to move his capital from Hebron to Jebus, also known as Jerusalem or Jerusalem, the city of righteousness. And he's going to take his army and he's going to attack Jerusalem. And if he can conquer it, he's going to make it the capital city in Israel so that he is in center of all the territory that he rules and reigns. Now the original inhabitants of the land of Canaan, the Jebusites, live in this city. The Ephraimites burned this thing to the ground when they crossed the Jordan years ago when they came across with Joshua, and nobody inhabited it, but the inhabitants of the land came back and rebuilt it, and they've been there. And the reason this is a good city is as the mountains surround Jerusalem, so the Lord surrounds his people. You've got a city sitting on top of Mount Moriah. Now, it's interesting that Mount Moriah is also the place where God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. When Jesus is condemned by Pilate, the temple sits here, and on the north end of the temple, you go through some big steps, there's a Roman fortress, Antonia. And when Pilate condemns Jesus to death, he's within 2 football fields of where Abraham would have sacrificed Isaac. This is not an accidental location. These things are not incidental, they're not accidental, they're not coincidental. And so David is drawn to, I'm going to put my capital city here. If you go to the eastern side of the city of Jerusalem, the temple wall that's not built yet, but the temple wall would, in Herod's time would have been about 16 stories, and you get about a 400-foot drop into the Kidron Valley. And that's a great place to have a military stronghold. If you'll give me high ground, I can defend a place. You know, you give me high ground and a minimum way to approach, that's ideal for tactics. So David wants to have this hilltop city and make it his citadel. 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 6. Now the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites, the inhabitants of the land, and they spoke to David, "You shall not come in here, but the blind and the lame will repel you." And they were thinking, David cannot come in here. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. These people are so comfortable with where they are on this mountainous approach with their walled city that when David comes with his army to besiege it, time, talk, tear gas, isolate, contain, negotiate. That's what you do to besiege a city. And so they're just going to camp out and eventually run these people out of resources and then try to take the city. But they're not afraid of David. They feel so confident in where they are that they say, hey, we could put a blind guy and we could put a guy in a wheelchair on top of the wall and he could keep you out of here. You can't come in here. This is impenetrable. Nevertheless, David took the stronghold of Zion, that is the city of David. Now, David said on that day, whoever climbs up by the way to the water shaft and defeats the Jebusites, the lame and the blind who are hated by David's soul, he shall be the chief captain. That is why they say the blind and the lame shall not come into my house. So you've got this military engagement. They're trying to conquer this city, and these guys are sitting on top of the wall and they're taunting David. They're insulting the warrior king of Israel. David is undefeated in battle except for a thing that will happen later with a giant named Ishbosheth, and David doesn't get killed by him, he just faints. He maybe has a heat stroke or low blood sugar. He's a middle-aged dude and just not the guy he used to be. But the only time David loses a battle, he's the only Old Testament warrior king doesn't die in battle. And so these guys are insulting David's integrity. You can't come in here. And in fact, if you try to come in here, we could put blind people and crippled people on top of this wall and you can't come in here. Now, David says that whoever does this is going to be the captain of my army. And to depend on the translation you read, one translation says the only way we can do this is to climb up the water shaft. The Gihon Spring flows out below Jerusalem and goes out into the Kidron, and there's a giant catacomb of openings underneath the city of Jerusalem. There's these vast open areas where in 1962 they discovered Solomon's stables under there. So what most people think is that they went in this underground thing, in these caves, and kind of ninja'd their way up. And Joab was the first guy to do this. One of the old translations says the only way you can do this is by using grappling hooks. Now that sounds like some straight ninja stuff, doesn't it? You throw the hook up. Well, no. When you were doing a battle like this, the grappling hooks were not used to climb. You would throw the grappling hooks over the wall, and because the wall is on the edge of a cliff, you pull it and you pull it down. It's always easier to pull something down than it is to pull something up. Not the purpose of this lesson, but if you want to do good object lesson, youth guys, get the strongest, biggest dude in your youth group and challenge him to play tug of war with the smallest, littlest girl in your youth group. But make him stand on a bar stool. And 9 times out of 10, the little bitty girl can pull a really big guy right off that thing, because it's easier to pull somebody down than it is to pull somebody up. Be careful who you surround yourself with. Be careful who you date. Be careful who you're friends with. But David says, okay, we'll either pull these walls down or somebody's going to have to climb up these water. Well, they do. Joab goes up. And so think about, you're standing on this wall and you're yelling and screaming and saying, you can't get in here, and the blind could keep you out and the lame could keep you out. And all of a sudden inside your city, a guy pops up from out of underground. It's a done deal. So they capture this city, and it becomes David's home base. It becomes David's citadel. He has the fortress of Zion, and it is called the city of David. But in this exchange, when these guys are taunting David, you have 2 verses here. David can't come in here because the blind and the lame could hold you off. And look at verse 8. Whoever climbs up by the water shafts and defeats the Jebusites, the lame and the blind that are hated by David's soul. The people who were there and heard these guys say this and heard David react to it, they came away telling their friends, David hates the blind and the lame. David can't stand the blind and the lame. Maybe when David said, I can't stand the blind and the lame, he was just talking about the people of Jebus. But it kind of grew legs. It kind of became this rumor. It kind of became part of the lore of David that David can't stand blind people and lame people. And then it goes on to say, therefore they say, the blind and the lame shall not come into the house. Not only does David not like them, not only does David hate them, but David said they can't even enter the house. They can't be in my presence. And this kind of legend that happens with David. Chapter 6, David brings the Ark of the Covenant to Jerusalem. He takes it out of the tabernacle at Shiloh, brings it into his kingdom, and later on he's going to want to build a house for the Ark of God, and he's not allowed to do it because he's a man of blood, because of the death of Uriah the Hittite. So his son Solomon is going to build the temple. But David's got his capital here. He's got his fortress here. He's got priests in place. He's got a personal bodyguard, the Cherethites, and he's got all this stuff. And now he's secure in his kingdom. And so while he's secure in his kingdom, he's thinking about, hey, is there any unfinished business? And then in 2 Samuel chapter 9, now David said, is there still anyone who is left of the house of Saul that I may show him kindness for Jonathan's sake? And there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Zeba. So when they called him to David, the king said, are you Zeba? And he said, at your service. And the king said to him, is there not still someone of the house of Saul to whom I may show the kindness of God? David gets to thinking about what was done in his life. You know, David goes from being an obscure shepherd boy to playing a harp for Saul, to being a guy who kills a giant on behalf of Saul, to being the leader of Saul's army. And then after he kills Goliath, he has this friendship with a guy named Jonathan. Jonathan is Saul's son, and instead of Jonathan being jealous of the fact that David is basically going to be the king instead of him, he gives David his sword, he gives David his bow, he gives David his tunic, he gives David his warrior's belt. I give knives to people when they're special friends of mine. I have 8 custom-made knives. There's only 8 of them on the planet. And I've given them to the people who are my Jonathans. 4 of those knives are in this room tonight. And I got that tradition from David and Jonathan. And so David looks back at Jonathan and says, you know, he was so kind to me. And even when his father had declared a bounty on my head, even when his father was trying to kill me, he stayed loyal to me. And really, if you look deep into this, Saul thought that David was his enemy. But David did not think Saul was his enemy. And that's a really different perspective. David did not reciprocate the hatred that Saul. David responded to Saul with a lot of love. David responded to Saul with a lot of respect. On 2 different occasions, David could have killed Saul. And because he respected his position as the anointed king of God, he didn't do it. And so now he's sitting in the citadel. He's at peace. There's unity in Israel. And David said, hey, is there somebody from the house of Saul that I could show kindness to because of my friend Jonathan? And another observation, when it comes time for David to run from Saul, he has this emotional meeting with Jonathan, and Jonathan bids him farewell, and they embrace each other. They're very emotional. They cry. And Jonathan, instead of running away with David, fulfills his duty as a prince of Israel and stays with his father. Young people, if you have friends who try to come between you and your parents, those are toxic friends. If you have people who say you've got to choose between what I want you to do and what your mom and dad have told you to do, that's a warning sign. That's an unhealthy relationship. Now, once you get married, a man leaves his father and his mother, cleaves to his wife. But your loyalty prior to marriage is to your mom and dad. And if you have friends trying to separate you from your family, those are toxic friends. Be careful. David and Jonathan had this loyalty, but Jonathan was also loyal to them. So David says, is there not anybody from the house of Saul? There's a servant left over from the house of Saul, and his name is Zeba. David said, bring him here. So this guy shows up for an audience with the king, and David says, is there anybody from the house of Saul I can show kindness to? And Zeba said to the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. Now, the Bible doesn't put a pause here, but it says there's a son of Jonathan, and he's lame in both of his feet. So the king said, hey, is there anybody from the house of Saul? Is there anybody from Jonathan's line that I can show kindness to? Bring this servant in here. Hey, do you work for Saul? Yeah, I'm in charge of some of Saul's holdings and things since he's dead. Is there anybody? Yes, there is. Who is he? His name's Jonathan. Bring him here. Everybody knows David hates lame people. Everybody knows these people are despised by David. Everybody knows that they will not come in my house. And this servant has to look at the warrior king of Israel, who when he gets bad news, he doesn't like it, he kills people. And he has to look at David and say, yeah, there's a kid from Jonathan's family. Jonathan's got a son. But he can't walk. He's crippled. He's not on your list. He's not allowed to be in your house. And the king said to him, where is he? And Zeba said to the king, indeed, he is in the house of Machir, the son of Ammiel in Lo-debar. And the king sent and brought him to the house of Machir and the son of Ammiel at the Lo-debar. Now when Mephibosheth, the son of Jonathan, the son of Saul, had come to David, he fell on his face and prostrated himself. And then David said, Mephibosheth, and he answered, here is your servant. And David said to him, do not fear, for I will surely show you kindness for Jonathan your father's sake, and I will restore to you all the land of Saul your grandfather, and you will eat bread at my table continually. And he bowed himself and said, what is your servant that you should look upon such a dead dog as I am? They go get Mephibosheth. Hey, the king has discovered you're still alive. The king has discovered you're a grandson of Saul. The people who were related to Saul had at different times tried to say, hey, David's not a legitimate heir to the throne. And in fact, when the word came out that Saul had died, the caretaker from Mephibosheth was running out of the place because they're just going to come kill everybody. And he fell and dropped this kid, and that's what broke both his legs. He's never been able to walk. And now they found me, and they dragged me in front of the king. And he lays on the floor in front of the king and rolls to his face. And the king says, you don't have to be afraid. Not only are you not going to be killed, you're going to eat it at my table. And Mephibosheth says, Who am I that you look at a dead dog like me? And the king called Zeba, Saul's servant, and said to him, I have given to you your master's son, all that belonged to Saul, and all to his house. You therefore and your sons and your servants shall work the land for him, and you shall bring in the harvest that your master's son may have food to eat. But Mephibosheth, your master's son, shall eat bread at my table always. And Zeba had 15 sons and 20 servants, and Zeba said to the king, according to all the Lord the king has commanded his servant, so will your servant do. As for Mephibosheth, said the king, he shall eat at my table as one of the king's sons. And Mephibosheth had a young son whose name was Micah, and all who dwelt in the house of Zeba were the servants of Mephibosheth. So Mephibosheth dwelt in Jerusalem, and he ate continually at the king's table, and he was lame in both of his feet. How does a crippled kid, a person who's in the category of David despises the lame, David despises the blind, how does a crippled kid, where everybody knows that the policy, the rule, the legend, the saying, the proverb is, the lame and the blind shall not come into my house, how does a crippled kid end up in the king's house at the king's table treated like one of the king's sons? Well, that's because David is a man after God's own heart. In my work with young people as a therapist, in my work as a counselor, young people come to me all the time. And you read their posts, and you read the things they tweet, and you read the things they post. And so much of it has an undercurrent of, I'm messed up. There's something wrong with me. I'm not smart. I'm not pretty. I'm not good. And some of you live in families, and it's not that you don't think you're good. You just don't think you can be good enough. And you walk out into the world and you compare your insides, what you know about yourself, to only what you can see about other people, their outsides, and you come away thinking, I'm not good enough, I don't measure up, I'm messed up. And then a lot of us in this room would not only say I'm messed up, but they would say I have messed up. Not only am I wounded and hurt and crippled, but I've wounded and hurt and crippled other people, and I'm not worthy. I'm not allowed to be at God's table. But everybody has a seat at the table. And not only do you have a seat at the table, you're invited to eat at the table like one of the king's sons. You walk into God's dining room, and you'd be uncomfortable because everybody knows that there's a sign on the back wall that says no sinners allowed. And I'm messed up, and I have messed up, and that sign's talking about me. And somebody says, sit at the table like one of the king's sons. Because I don't care that you're messed up, and I don't care that you have messed up. I have the ability, because of my relationship with my son that you have with my son, to treat you as if you are one of my sons or one of my daughters. And we come into the presence of God and we say, you don't know what I've done. You don't know how messed up I am, and you don't know how much I've messed up. And this is what God says about you being messed up or having messed up. Psalm chapter 103, verse 11. For as the heavens are high above the earth, so great is his mercy toward those who fear him. Mercy basically is the understanding that I'm going to treat you as if. I'm going to give you what you need, not what you deserve. It doesn't matter that you don't feel adequate. It doesn't matter that you don't feel like you fit in. It doesn't matter that you don't feel like you measure. And so, we do that. We compare who we are to who somebody else is. I was teasing Dan Chambers. I said, Dan, you're going to speak, a lesson. You're going to talk about climbing. You've never been on a rock. And I'm going to talk about Jerusalem, and I've never been there. Dan's been to Jerusalem 10 times. I've never seen Jerusalem except on a map. But I've been an amateur climber for a long, long time. I've climbed in Yosemite. When you watch the Free Solo movie, there's a crack that they climb in Yosemite, and Alex Honnold's girlfriend drops him. using a gree-gree, which is a special kind of stupid. But anyway, she drops him using this special belay device, and I've climbed that route. And I've climbed in Yosemite. And I remember the first time I did a big wall. I was in right outside Estes Park in Colorado, and I was climbing with this guy. We were going to do like a 6-pitch climb, which using the same rope 6 times. A guy from Colorado Mountain School. And so we were out there, and we practiced our knots and made sure we could self-rescue. And so we're climbing, and this young man says, now, this next pitch, and we're 3 or 4 pitches into this thing, and that's using the same length of rope a couple of times. And he said, now what I'm going to do, he said, I'm going to go out on this hand ledge, and after you get out on this hand ledge, you got to go up, and there's a flake. And in order to climb over this flake, you've got to do a move called a lie back. He said, and can you lie back? Well, I did a 75-foot lie back in the New River Gorge. And a lie back is basically if you could take the corner of the building and separate it so you have a wall facing a wall. You put your hands inside the crack and your feet on the opposite wall. You push with your legs and pull with your arms. I don't climb like a ballerina. I'm a power climber. And that's good for a guy with a little bitty short arms, a little bitty short legs. And so I did a 75-foot lie back, and I scraped against the rocks so much on that 75-foot climb, I tore the sleeve off my shirt. It was wrapped around my wrist. But I said, yeah, I can lie back climb. He goes, there's 6 lie back moves. And this guy leaves me. I'm buckled into a place there. I'm belaying him as he goes up, and he climbs out of sight. Well, while he's climbing, I'm thinking, man, I'm a pocket climber. I didn't come out here and find a route and climb on my own. I hired this guy to climb with me, and I'm basically like a tourist. I'm not really a climber. I'm just following this guy up this route. I'm cleaning the route. I'm having to pull the gear, but I'm not really a climber. But then he tugs the rope 3 times. And I tug the rope 3 times. He tugs it 3 more times because the wind's blowing so hard you can't hear each other. So I go out on this hand ledge, and I get out, and I pop up, and here's this flake that you've got to lie back on. But instead of it being a lie back in a corner, it's just on the side of this rock. So I put my hands under it, and I put my feet against the wall, and I lean out, and I'm 600 feet in the air. And I just watch the world fall away. And your hands will start to sweat. That's when you use that white chalk. All white powdered substances are addictive, and I covered myself in chalk. I chalked that stuff up. And I did 6 lie back moves hanging over the valley. And I got on top of that thing and went, you quite possibly might be a climber. You're not a tourist. You actually could be Spider-Man. And then in the route, between the route I was on and the other route, this 16-year-old kid with a chalk bag and a pair of shorts comes cruising by me free soloing. Good morning, dude. I said, good morning. And off he goes, and he just disappears. And I get to the top of the pitch, and I said, hey, some kid just free soloed by me. Yeah, that's Chris. He lives out here. He climbs this route every day before school. It's easy to compare yourself with other people and say, hey, I'm not really a climber. It's easy to compare yourself and say, I'm not worthy. But listen to what God says about your unworthiness. For as the heavens are high above the earth, so great is his mercy toward those who fear him. God doesn't care what you're not. He understands what you can be. And when you learn to live and get past your past and live in your present toward your potential, that's when the loving power and the mercy of God is there. And the next verse says, as far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. Now, I think that's a super interesting turn of phrase there, because he says the heavens are higher than the earth, and you take that distance between heaven and earth, and that's the measure, that's the quantification of how great God's mercy is, and that's a huge number. He said, but then you want another measurement? He says, as far as the east is from the west, he has removed your sins from you. Hey, I messed up. I am messed up. God takes that when you repent and you become a Christian, or if you've been a Christian for a time and you've repented, when you tell God, I want to be different, I want to be better, I want to go past the mess I made. God says, I take that thing that you did, that thing that you think is messed up, and I remove it from you as far as the east is from the west. As an amateur climber, you look for places to climb. Now, one of the things you want to do is you want to be the guy who does a first ascent. And I'm not really good enough to do very many first ascents, so I try to find obscure places to climb. And you find a little place on a topo and you think, hey, nobody's probably ever climbed this. The one for sure 100% first ascent I've got is a place called Snake Fossil. It's an exposed rock on Cherry Tree Lane in between the town of Huntsville and the town of Gurley. I think me and Troy Farmer are the only two guys ever climbed that. But you get, hey, there's a rock formation here, or there's a rock formation there. And so you start trying to find these things. This is before there's Google Maps. So you go drive into some little community and you see a rock formation out on the, hey, have you ever heard of a place called Candle Stand? Have you ever heard of a place called the Sink? Have you ever heard of a place called the Lost Wall? And you start asking these people, and if you're getting directions, no offense to anybody in the room, but if you're getting directions from a dude in Tennessee, you're at peril. Because a guy from Tennessee would go, well, you go down there where they cut that tree down last year, and you turn left, and you drive till you see the new chicken house. Well, I gave him some grace on where they cut the tree down because I thought there might be a stump there. I said, sir, how am I supposed to know a new chicken house from an old chicken house? He said, the age of the chickens, dummy. Well, I said, I'm going to go cart a bunch of chickens. I'm okay there. We pulled in. We were on top of the Cumberland Plateau looking for a place near Fall Creek Falls called Copperhead. And we pulled up, and this old guy was standing there in his overalls, had his thumbs in his overalls, and I told him what we were looking for, and he rocked back on his heels. He said, I don't think you can get there from here. Well, I believe you can get there from anywhere. Now, they may take some planes and trains and automobiles, but the idea you can't get there from here stuck in my mind, because as far as the east is from the west, he has removed your transgressions from you. You see, if you take a globe, and the world is round, okay, you flat earther people, I'm just saying, the world is round, and if I put my finger on a globe at Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and I start moving north, at some point on that globe, I'm going to start moving south. If I put my finger on a globe in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and I start moving south, at some point I'm going to start moving north. But if you put your globe in Pigeon Forge, Tennessee, and you start moving east, as long as you move east, your compass will show that you're moving east. You can't get there from here. And I don't care what you've done. I don't care what you've not done. I don't care that you feel like you're messed up, and I don't care if you feel like you are messed up. As far as the east is from the west, God takes that messed up and he puts it away from you, and he puts it away from him. And that's why you're allowed to come and sit at the king's table like one of the king's sons, because God's taken care of that. We were cleaning out some stuff when my daughter moved to college, and I found the little Bible that she used to carry. She had a learning disability with written languages, and so we got a real simple translation to read. And once we addressed some of the things about her learning, she started reading, like a modern speech translation and an NIV. But this was like an easy read Bible, and I had her little Bible and was flipping through it and had all these notes. And I found a passage and written in the margin said, "My dad's favorite verse." And I'm not sure what makes a 7th or an 8th or a 9th grader decide this is your favorite verse, but she wrote it in her Bible. And the verse she marked as my favorite verse is Romans chapter 4, verse 17. In Romans chapter 4, verse 17, it says, "As it is written, I have made you a father of many nations in the presence of him who believed, God, who gives life to the dead and calls things that are not as though they were." One translation says, calls things that do not exist as if they did. Literally what that says is call things not being as being. You see, you can sit at the king's table and eat bread like one of the king's sons, because God takes things that are not. God takes things that are messed up and says they're perfect. God takes people who have messed up and says it's forgiven. God takes the weak and says they're strong. God takes the poor and makes them rich. There's a line in a song by the group a cappella years and years ago. It says, "Satan is a liar, and he wants to make us think we're paupers when he knows himself we're children of the king." You're a child of the king, and you've got a spot at that table. And it doesn't matter that everybody knows the sign says no sinners. When you come and you sit down at your spot at the table, God has taken your sin. God has taken your messed up. God has taken the fact that you messed up, or you feel like you are messed up, and He's removed it as far as the east is from the west, and you can't get there from here. And so you've got a spot at the table. You've got a chair at the table. You've got a place carved, your name on it, and you're allowed to come sit and eat like one of the king's sons. And it doesn't matter that you feel crippled or lame or broken or messed up, and it doesn't matter that you have messed up. As far as the east is from the west, God has removed that from you, and God calls things that are not as if they were. And God says, you are my children. You are in my family. And why don't you claim your spot at the table in your chair, regardless of what you think you are? This is, God says, what you can be. Regardless of that you feel like you are messed up, you have messed up, God says, come and sit at your spot at my table. And the only reason you don't have a spot at that table is if you don't claim your seat. There's a seat with your name on it. Won't you come sit in it tonight?